Now, the food security challenge in Nigeria before President Bola Tinubu's administration was deeply challenging, characterized by severe food insecurity in 2022, with roughly 66 million Nigerians struggling to access adequate food and nearly 19 million suffering from acute hunger. Persistent food inflation, insecurity in farming regions due to terrorism and clashes, and climate change-induced floods severely undermined food production and distribution. Well, joining us on the show to discuss how the agriculture sector has fared so far with the recent insecurity across the North and the Middle Belt is David Stevenson, Country Director and Representative of the United Nations World Food Programme. Good morning and welcome to the program today.
Good morning. Happy to be with you.
Okay, Mr. Stevenson, thank you for joining us. Now, the 2026 Appropriation Bill of Nigeria emphasizes defense and security, health, education, and infrastructure. Now, agriculture is somewhere down the ladder. However, it is embedded in, security and defense and also infrastructure. Some people criticizing that budget have said, look, agriculture should stand alone. In the last 9 years, agriculture has not been given more than 1.4% of the budget. Some people think agriculture deserves more, particularly in the light of the Maputo Declaration, which says agriculture is more important. Now, as head of the World Food Programme in Nigeria, what do you think about this criticism of the level of priority given to food production, food security in Nigeria?
Well, thank you very much. What I can say, I arrived in the country about 3 years ago, and World Food Programme is primarily here because of the insecurity, the conflict-related hunger in the north of the country. We arrived in 2015 at the request of the government and our member states because of Boko Haram and ISWAP in the northeast, but we've spread our operations across the north into the northwest, Sokoto and other states there, conflict security related, if not Boko Haram and ISWAP, banditry and so on, which you talk a lot about on your program. So in answering your question of prioritization of the agricultural sector, you're right to point out that it's interconnected. The most important thing we can have is peace in production in the north of the country, getting farmers back on their farms because there are too many displaced farmers. So it's important to understand that interconnectedness, and that the government is coming forward, I think, with an attempt at a coherent approach, looking at the challenges in their multifaceted ways, political, security, looking at agricultural production, but the food system in general leading up to nutrition outcomes and agricultural growth, understanding the economic reforms and the economic aspects of agriculture. All of this needs to be looked at, and then you can really have a return to the growth that in the north, pre-2010 was the breadbasket of the country, the breadbasket of the region, and I think those prospects are still there.
Stevenson, now, most Nigerians will say, well, when you go into the markets across the country, they're brimming with food. Produce is readily available in excess. Most times, if you speak to those who sell in the markets, they'll tell you how much wastage there is, how much has to be thrown away because it rots before it has been bought, which speaks to a different reality, which is that food is available, but our issue is that it's unaffordable. I'd like for you to speak to that because I've read a number of the reports from the World Food Programme, which almost paint a picture that there's no food in Nigeria. But like I said, when you go to the market, food is available, but it's unaffordable. I'd like for you to reconcile these two narratives.
Well, food would be a lot more available if the country could increase its yields, there is an opportunity to double or triple yields, particularly in the small-scale farming sector, increase agricultural infrastructure, including dealing with post-harvest losses, increase the markets, the functioning of the markets, so the value chain approach, and then stabilize prices. But you are right to say there is food on markets. The question in the last couple of years has been at what price? And what happened at the inauguration was, the President Tinubu announced the reform program, ending of the fuel subsidies, and attempts to balance the exchange rate. That triggered short-term food inflation, very significant food inflation, 200% to 300% for some staple commodities, sorghum, maize, beans, and so on. Everybody thought that was a good approach, though, because the country needed to stabilize its market and get out of the subsidy-driven waste in terms of economic development. And the good news is now prices have stabilized. In fact, they're almost down to pre-reform levels. So what we're looking at now is the prospects of a more stable agricultural economy where in post-harvest, such as now, prices drop, and moving towards the lean season, prices will naturally increase, but not the kind of spreads that exist. Now, in terms of food availability, for those who have money, food is available. It always is, everywhere in the world. The biggest issue here is those that do not have the money, either to pay into that high food inflation economy because they're low-income consumers, or most importantly, small-scale farmers themselves, the displaced people who actually can be part of the solution in terms of food availability. But if they're not on their farms, if they're in IDP camps and not producing, they have both a double challenge, helping to produce food, but not being able to access the market. And that's what the World Food Program has been saying over the years. That's why we were asked to come here, and that's why we advocate that the hungry poor need to be helped to become self-reliant.
Understood. I mean, just then in your answer, and also in your first one, you talked about how the World Food Programme has had a presence in Nigeria since 2015 at the request of the then presidency, that you yourself have been in Nigeria for 3 years. So looking at the institution itself and then you individually, enough time has passed for you to see some form of a measurable difference since the coming of the World Food Programme. So to that vein, are you able to share with us what specifically the World Food Programme is doing on the ground in Nigeria to address these issues when it comes to food security and access to food? Is there any program that is measurable in order for us to have a yardstick, a metric of the difference the World Food Programme has brought to Nigeria since its presence in the country?
Okay, so the most important difference we're making is helping to save lives and maintain livelihoods. So it's a program of food assistance for those who do not have access to food otherwise, particularly due to the conflict. And so the results on that number in the millions. We assist 1-2 billion Nigerians per year, and I'm pretty proud to be part of a humanitarian effort where you can see those measurable lives being saved and the prospects of returning to productivity. Now, what we want to be doing more of is helping get these people back on farms and producing. 3 years ago when I arrived, it looked like we had the conditions, all led by government, of course, and our private sector partners, to start that gradual process. Number of attacks had decreased, and there was a durable solutions model in place. It still is in place, which we're all part of, to start that transition. But now the attacks have increased, and that situation of returns has stabilized. Meanwhile, though, it's not good enough, in my view. The World Food Programme advocates this, and we've worked very hard here in Nigeria to say it's not good enough just to save lives. We need an approach, not of handouts, but of supporting people with self-reliance, so humanitarian solutions. And we've come together with many partners here in Nigeria on a strategy for that. It's starting to make significant gains where there are pockets of stability to help people with livelihood. That means small-scale solar-powered irrigation to allow them to plant longer seasons, increase their yields, provide food for their families and the agricultural economy. We're doing that more and more with the multilateral development banks. The World Bank is coming online with something called AgriConnect with UN agencies, and most importantly with the Nigerian private sector. So there is a way of co-investing so that humanitarian funding isn't just going on the response effort, but it's contributing with development partners on the solutions and getting the agricultural economy back to where it should be, which is the engine of growth, particularly in the north.
Okay, Mr. Stevenson, I've listened very carefully to what you have had to say. You spent about 3 years in Nigeria. So at a personal level, what are the challenges that you have had to experience, and also at the institutional level? You've provided some pathways, but what are those challenges, and what do you think could be the major priority areas?
So I've worked in this kind of work over 33 years throughout Africa. I arrived in Africa in 1992 and have worked across the continent in this kind of work, but also at the African Development Bank. So not only in the UN system, multilateral financing role with a major foundation, so investing in Africa, and with my country, Canadian government diplomatic work. So I've really seen it all, but I've never been in a country as diverse, as challenging, and frankly, as exciting as Nigeria. You've got the biggest population, the biggest economy, the greatest potential, certainly in the agricultural sector and the food security sector, but across the board, whether it's Nollywood in the creative industry, or whether it's the oil sector, or back to agriculture and food systems growth. But unfortunately, the challenges of conflict have been persistent, much more persistent than I certainly would have hoped. So we're staying the course. We're asking our donor partners to stay the course, because dropping the ball on humanitarian assistance too quickly is a really bad idea. What you're going to have is increased migration, potential for people with no other choice to potentially join armed insurgency groups, and make it much more difficult for that positive story to play itself out. So I would say, take the crunchy with the smooth a little bit. A huge inspiration and prospects for agricultural growth. This country should be roaring in terms of the agricultural economy, feeding Nigerians, but even feeding the region. If you can get the value chain growth going, but there needs to be peace and then production, and this is the big challenge that we're all facing.
Absolutely. I think you've struck all the right notes with that. Thank you so much for your time today, Mr. David Stevenson of the World Food Programme.